Okay, now we're getting to another important concept of discrimination. And this is an accusation leveled against Muslims and Islamic law generally that Islam discriminates on the basis of gender, on the basis of religious belief, on the basis of status. And how do we analyze and critique this kind of accusation against Islam? So this is not going to be too difficult because of everything that we've said in the previous modules. But let's think about this idea of discrimination. We already determined that it's paradigm dependent, right? When we talked about equality. Equality, what is it? Treat similar cases similarly. Treat different cases differently. So when we discriminate in Islam on certain issues on the basis of gender, it's because their genders are different. The discrimination of gender is based on a legitimate difference, and that difference is determined on the basis of the paradigm. So that's one way that you can see how we can address all of these discrimination claims against Islam. But we also realize that the enlightened West discriminates on many qualities that you are born with. Okay, they've identified gender discrimination is wrong because supposedly there's no difference between men and women, and in fact gender is just a construct. You can have an infinite number of genders. Complete ignorance of reality and human nature, but whatever. You can't discriminate on the basis of race. That's something that Muslims agree with. Should not be. There's no relevant difference between people on the basis of their racial background. And notice how that's not saying that there's no difference between the races. Yeah, there could be many differences between people on the basis of race, on the basis of ethnicity, but that's not a relevant difference. That is not a relevant difference for the law, for the Sharia, right? Whereas the gender differences are relevantly different. So again, these are all considerations from the larger paradigm. But what other things are people discriminated on the basis of within the modernist paradigm? You have discrimination on the basis of intelligence. Intelligence is something that you're born with, but immediately in grade school, children are divided up and segregated on the basis of their performance in school, and that's dependent on intelligence, which is an inborn quality. IQ, for example, so that is a form of discrimination that's considered legitimate within the enlightened West. And then that's grade school, and then your job in the future. The colleges that you're accepted into are on the basis of your grades in school. Your future career prospects are on the basis of the college that you went to. So all of these outcomes are on the basis of something that you were born with. But there's no problem with that according to the modernist liberal mind. Then physical attractiveness, same thing. That's not something that you as a person can control. I mean, you can go and have plastic surgery, but that costs money. But some people are just born beautiful. So that's an unfair advantage, right? Okay, the system that is set up, the secular system, gives people who are more attractive an advantage that others do not receive. So why isn't this considered a kind of structural inequality, a structural problem with the secular states, that attractiveness can actually lead to a better outcome when it's something that you're physically born with? Height, how tall you are, has been shown to be highly correlated with your success financially and in terms of career track. Your weight, if you're overweight, if you're, fit a certain body type. Ability to concentrate and be productive. These are all things that the system discriminates on the basis of. it's interesting that nowadays there are movements within the feminist movement, for example, that will actually attack discrimination on the basis of weight. Fat shaming. We shouldn't be fat shaming. We should accept everyone. Doesn't matter what weight they have. It's actually a sign of bigotry if you have certain standards of beauty, or you judge people on the basis of their weight or their attractiveness. This is something that needs to be stamped out of society. But how can you do that? How can you do that? How can you get a person to not take into account attractiveness when choosing a wife or choosing a husband? How can you take, women are looking for tall men, right? Tall, dark, and handsome is one expression. So how can you get women to not look at that and to be blind when it comes to height? That's just their nature. Okay, discriminating on the basis of these qualities is a part of human nature. So you have to kind of re-engineer human beings and the human mind, the human psychology, in order to create this complete egalitarianism. It's completely unnatural, and it will have a lot of costs, and ultimately you're destroying human beings. You're destroying what a human being is by manipulating his psychology and his nature. So this type of cultural engineering of the human body and the human mind is what we had mentioned at the introduction to this course. This is part of the liberal project to take away some of these differences. But I mean, that's just one example. There's many further examples that we're going to talk about in the next courses in the liberalism series, inshallah. So here's some other kinds of discrimination that we've already mentioned, and they seem pretty irrational. Discrimination based on where you were born. So you won't get citizenship if you're not born within the country, and then citizens versus non-citizens, the law heavily discriminates on that basis in terms of your mobility, in terms of opportunities, how you can move across borders, what kind of jobs you can get, where you can go study, what kind of medical care you can access. All of that will be on the basis of where you were born, this quality, this inborn quality that you can't control. So how are those things justified? So the point here is not that discrimination is necessarily bad. Okay, Islam is not here to take away all differences between people. That's not Islam's understanding of discrimination. But again, it goes back to what is a legitimate point of discrimination. What is a legitimate way to treat people differently? And the Islamic paradigm is very clear on the answer to that question. But the liberal paradigm, the secular paradigm, the modernist paradigm is imposing these kinds of points of discrimination that, first of all, don't make sense, and also violate their supposed claim to not discriminate at all. Okay? In the minds of some liberals and modernists, it's possible not to discriminate at all. You can have a utopia where everyone is exactly the same. But as we can see, the only way that would happen is if you fundamentally engineer and transform the human race and the human nature to erase those kinds of differences and those kinds of proclivities. So either it's nonsensical or it's like this sci-fi horror that liberalism is proposing. Okay. So discrimination on all these factors is acceptable, especially citizenship and so forth, but it's not called discrimination in a negative sense. Okay, so this is the point. Ultimately, discrimination is based on paradigm. We have gender discrimination in Islam. We have religious discrimination in Islam. We also have status discrimination, slave status versus free status. There is a different set of laws in the Sharia that discriminates on the basis of whether you're a slave or not. And we're going to talk about slavery in the upcoming course, inshallah, in this series on liberalism, where we're going to address all of these issues. But right now we're just setting the groundwork to be able to analyze these issues. So this is discrimination, very easy to handle it, alhamdulillah.